But no, politics is way up the scale from where this is actually taking place.
So when you're talking with students, both one-on-one or you're getting their questions, and I'm going to get to some of your questions here very shortly, these are not all conservative students that are coming up to you and they're downloading your videos and listening to your podcast. And it's not, even though it is a lot of young men, it's not all men.
Right.
What do you think drives people to the message and to the things that you talk about?
Oh, I think it's that I'm believable. And, well, that's why. That's why. I mean, you know, in most of my lectures, so I've done about 150 public lectures or so in the last year, all over the world, and to large audiences. The audiences in Australia were starting to approach, well, we had audiences of 5,500 people in Australia. So, which is quite remarkable, you know, that 5,500 people would come to listen to like a serious discussion about philosophical, theological, and psychological issues, and to participate in that. And I don't pull any punches. I'm not speaking down. I would never speak down to an audience. I think that's a dreadful error of arrogance. But the reason that I think people believe what I say is that I'm very pessimistic. Well, look, because most times when you listen to someone who's a motivational speaker, let's say, you know, it fills you with a temporary optimism, but you go home and the wiser part of you knows that mostly it's the painting over of rotten wood with a fresh coat of paint. And I tell my audiences very clearly that their life is going to be difficult, and sometimes difficult beyond both imagining and tolerance. And that is definitely in your future, if it isn't in your present, and for many people it's in their present. And that can be unbearable, that enough to turn you against life itself, to corrupt you, to drive you to nihilism, to drive you to suicide, and worse, to drive you to thoughts of vengefulness, of infinite scope, to not only be turned against yourself and your fellow men, but to be turned against being itself because of its intrinsically brutal, in some sense, nature. And that it's worse than that, actually, because it's not only that we suffer, and that will necessarily occur, but that we all make our suffering worse because of our ignorance and our malevolence. And everyone knows that to be true. And so the discussions start, let's say, on an unshakable foundation. But then I can tell people, look, despite that, we're remarkable creatures. You know, we're capable of taking up the burden of that suffering and facing the reality of that malevolence voluntarily. We can actually do that. And all of the psychological evidence suggests, and this is independent of your school of psychology, if you're a practical psychologist, a clinical psychologist of any sort, the evidence is crystal clear that if people voluntarily confront the problems that face them and the malevolence that surrounds them, that they can make headway against it. And not only psychologically, so it's not only meaningful to do that psychologically, which it is, to confront the problems that torment you voluntarily, that's meaningful psychologically, but it's also practically useful in that you can actually solve some of the problems that beset you. And God only knows how good we could get at that. You know, I mean, I don't know what percentage of human effort is spent in counterproductive activity. You know, I'm not an absolute cynic about that, but I mean, when I talk to undergraduates, I ask them, you know, how much time do you waste every day by your own reckoning? And it's somewhere between 5 and 8 hours. You know, it's a lot of time. Well, and I usually walk the students through an economic analysis of that. I said, well, you know, why don't you value your time at $50 an hour and calculate for yourself just exactly what you're doing to your future by your inability to discipline yourself. It's worth thinking through. In any case, people do waste a lot of time, and they also act counterproductively a lot of the time. Regardless, we do make progress, and we can thrive under the difficult conditions that make up our lives, and we can resist the malevolence that entices us. That's within our power.